Today, we're going to explore one of the most dramatic and tragic stories in the Bible, the rise and fall of King Saul. Saul's journey is marked by moments of hope, promise, and unfortunately, a devastating fall that separated him from God. This is a story of power, pride, obedience, and the consequences of losing focus on who truly deserves all the glory. Get ready to dive deep into the life of Israel's first king, a man who began with great potential, but ended his journey in isolation and despair. Imagine a time in Israel when there was no king. The people were crying out for a leader to protect them from their enemies and bring order to the nation. In this context, God chose Saul, a young man, tall and imposing, from a family of the tribe of Benjamin. Saul was everything the people imagined a king should be: impressive, strong, and charismatic. In 1 Samuel chapter 9, we are introduced to this man who seemed like the solution to all of Israel's problems. He was humble, unsure, and even reluctant to accept the role, which made his selection even more intriguing. When Samuel anointed Saul as king, he did so in the name of God. This anointing wasn't just a formality, it was a spiritual consecration, a sign that Saul had been set apart to lead the people of God. And for a time, Saul did exactly that. He showed leadership in his early battles, liberating the people of Jabesh-Gilead from the Ammonites, and the people accepted him as their king, recognizing his authority and leadership. In the beginning, Saul had the Spirit of God upon him. The Bible records in 1 Samuel chapter 10 that Saul prophesied with a group of prophets, and the Spirit of the Lord changed his heart. It was a defining moment, a sign that God was with him and would empower him for the mission ahead. Imagine the scene: Saul, taken over by the presence of God, prophesying, being filled with power and divine authority. It seemed like he was destined to become a great king, someone who would leave a positive mark on Israel's history. But, like so many human stories, Saul's journey did not follow the trajectory of greatness that it promised. The first sign that Saul was beginning to drift away from God happened at Gilgal, when he was facing the Philistines. Samuel had instructed Saul to wait 7 days until his arrival to offer sacrifices to the Lord. This was a clear test of obedience, to trust God even under pressure. However, when Samuel delayed and Saul's army began to scatter, the king decided to take matters into his own hands. He offered the sacrifice, something only a priest was supposed to do. As soon as he finished, Samuel arrived and confronted Saul. "You have acted foolishly," Samuel said, making it clear that Saul's act of disobedience would cost him his kingship. This was the first major crack in Saul's relationship with God. He chose haste and fear over trusting the instructions God had given. Imagine Saul's dilemma at that moment. His troops were scattering, fear was growing, and the pressure was at its peak. He thought he was doing what was necessary to secure victory, but the problem wasn't the sacrifice itself. It was the fact that Saul disobeyed a clear command from God. He was starting to rely more on his own decisions than on divine direction. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, God gave Saul a specific mission to completely destroy the Amalekites, including their flocks and their king, as judgment for their continuous opposition to Israel. This was a clear and direct order, but Saul decided to do things his own way. He spared Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and the best of the flocks, justifying his disobedience as a sacrifice to God. When Samuel arrived and saw what Saul had done, he did not hide his indignation. Saul tried to defend himself, saying he had obeyed God, but Samuel quickly corrected him, stating, "To obey is better than sacrifice." This phrase echoes as a fundamental truth about our relationship with God. It is not about what we can offer God in terms of ritual or appearance, but our willingness to obey and submit to His will. By sparing what God had commanded to be destroyed, Saul showed that he was more concerned with appearing pious than actually being obedient. Samuel declared that God had rejected Saul as king because of his disobedience. Imagine the pain and shame Saul felt at that moment. He had started with so much potential, but his inability to trust and follow God's instruction began to define his reign. From this point on, the Spirit of God departed from him, and Saul began to descend further into a spiral of despair and anguish. With God's rejection, something dark began to haunt Saul. The Spirit of the Lord departed from him, and an evil spirit began to torment him. This spirit of disturbance brought with it a more unstable, paranoid, and desperate Saul. It was during this period that David entered the scene, initially as a musician who calmed Saul with his harp. David's music brought momentary peace to Saul, but the real problem was not being solved. Saul was disconnected from God, and his soul was in constant torment. When David defeated Goliath and began to gain popularity among the people of Israel, Saul started to see David not as an ally, but as a threat. Jealousy took deep root in Saul's heart, driving him to relentlessly pursue David, attempting to kill him on numerous occasions. Saul was so blinded by jealousy that he could not see that David was God's chosen successor and that he was, in fact, fighting against God's plan. This jealousy was a direct consequence of losing intimacy with God. Without divine guidance, Saul was overwhelmed by his emotions and insecurities. As the years went by, Saul became increasingly isolated, and his connection with God was almost completely severed. In one of the most desperate moments of his life, before a decisive battle against the Philistines, Saul decided to seek an answer in the occult. He consulted the witch of Endor, an act that went against everything God had commanded. Saul wanted guidance, but he no longer had access to God's voice. He asked the witch to bring up the spirit of Samuel, and what he received was only confirmation of his impending end. Samuel told him that, because of his disobedience, he and his sons would die in the coming battle, and the kingdom would pass to David. Imagine the scene. Saul, once God's chosen one, now stooping to forbidden practices, seeking answers that he already knew would not be good. This moment illustrates just how far he had strayed, not only from his role as king, but from his faith and his connection with the God who had anointed him. The next day, Samuel's words came true. The Philistines attacked, and the army of Israel was defeated. Saul, wounded and seeing no hope left, decided to take his own life to avoid being captured by the enemies. It was a tragic end for a man who had been chosen with so much promise and potential. Saul began as a leader full of hope, filled with the Spirit of God, but ended alone, defeated, and separated from any divine connection. The story of the rise and fall of Saul is one of the saddest in the Bible. It serves as a powerful reminder that, no matter how promising our journey begins, without obedience and humility, the connection with God is lost. Saul lost his intimacy with God because of his disobedience, pride, and inability to fully submit to God's plan. He teaches us that it's not our achievements or position that maintain our connection with God, but a humble and obedient heart. Obeying God is not just a requirement, it is the key to living under His guidance and blessing. The story of Saul's rise and fall is one of the saddest in the Bible, but also one of the most instructive. It reminds us that no matter how promising our beginning may be, without obedience and humility, our connection with God is lost. Saul was chosen, anointed, and had every opportunity to become a great leader, but his pride and disobedience drew him away from God's purpose. God does not seek grand achievements or status. He seeks a humble heart willing to obey. True greatness is not found in gaining power, but in submitting to God's will. Let us learn from Saul, always choosing the path of obedience and surrender to God's plan. If this story touched you, please leave a comment below, like the video, and share it. May God bless you all.